His cot was the third from the left. I can still see the shape of it, even though it's been empty for months. Every night, I wrote him another letter. Every morning, I folded it away, knowing he might never read it, but writing it anyway. I suppose that's what this is now. Another letter. A long, sprawling conversation I'm having with a ghost of a memory. Someone who existed in the low light of a canvas tent, somewhere near the beaches of Normandy. I'm writing it down because the silence here is too loud sometimes, even now, long after the worst of the noise faded into the background hum of routine. June 28th, 1944, my dearest unknown soldier. It's raining tonight. The kind of soft, persistent rain that makes the canvas roof sigh, just like it did on the night you first spoke to me. I remember that sound more clearly than I remember yesterday's breakfast. The smell of mud and antiseptic hangs heavy, even in the dry air of the hut I'm in now, back in England. But back then, in the heat and the chaos of the MASH unit, that smell was the perfume of survival. I keep thinking about the mud. We were just a few miles inland from the invasion beaches, and the whole world felt like it was coated in a thick, reddish-brown paste. We were barely a week past the initial landings, but already the lines of wounded seemed endless. Trucks rumbled constantly, bringing them in, taking them out. It was a relentless rhythm of noise and silence, hope and profound exhaustion. I was Evelyn Brooks, just Evelyn, a lieutenant in the Army Nurse Corps, and mostly just a girl from Ohio trying desperately to act like a seasoned professional. I remember arriving, looking out over the endless sprawl of olive-drab tents, feeling a hollow ache of responsibility settle deep in my chest. It was nothing like the training films. The sheer scale of the needs, the shock, the fear, it was a tangible weight in the air. You were just a blur at first, one of dozens. We tried to give everyone a name, a diagnosis, a sense of dignity, but they flowed through us so fast. Sometimes all we had time for was cleaning them up, stabilizing them, and moving them to the rear. You were marked for evacuation, but you weren't stable enough yet to make the journey, so you stayed in the post-op tent, tucked into that third cot. That was the night the Germans reminded us where we were. It wasn't a huge raid, not like the newsreels showed, but it was enough. It was late, maybe 11 o'clock. The main sounds had been the groans of the tent supports and the quiet shuffling of the orderlies, and then suddenly the siren split the night. Everything changed instantly. The flashlights went out, replaced by the thin, blue glow of the blackout lamps. Every nurse knew the drill. Soothe the patients, reassure them, keep them flat, keep them quiet. I moved quickly down the line. Most of the men were too doped up or too exhausted to care much, but the sudden darkness always brought on a spike of anxiety. When I got to your cot, you weren't crying out or shivering. You were just perfectly still. I leaned down close, keeping my voice low, just a whisper above the sound of the rain hitting the canvas and the distant, dull thud of the anti-aircraft fire. "It's all right, soldier," I said. "Just stay put. We're protected here." You didn't open your eyes, but you did speak, and your voice was what stopped me. It wasn't the voice of a boy or the voice of a man broken by pain. It was just calm, maybe even a little wry. "Ma'am," you whispered, and it was hard to tell where the sound came from. I appreciate the thought, but being protected in a nylon tent when the redropping flares overhead seems like a highly optimistic statement. I had to bite back a sudden, surprising laugh. Optimism was a scarce commodity in Normandy that summer. "Well, we have excellent sandbags and very strong faith in the engineering corps," I whispered back, leaning closer so only you could hear me over the escalating rumble outside. You shifted slightly, wincing just a little. It was your left leg that was the primary issue. I think, though, you'd had surgery for shrapnel removal. We always documented everything, but the paperwork got lost in the shuffle of your sudden transfer later, didn't it? That's why I don't know your full name or unit now. It's not the bombs I mind so much," you continued, your voice a low, gravelly tenor. It's the waiting. The silence between the waiting and the noise. That's what gets into your head. And just like that, the conversation began. In the absolute darkness of that tent, with the real war raging just a few miles away, we began to talk about everything except the war. We talked until the all clear sounded, until the blackout lamps came up just slightly, revealing the pale, exhausted faces of the other men. That was the first night. There were 6 more. 6 nights of conversation that knitted themselves into the fabric of my duty, making that third cot feel less like a temporary medical staging area and more like the only stable point in a rapidly moving world. I wonder if you remember them as clearly as I do. July 1st, 1944. The days here, as the tide of the fighting moved inland, were a constant exercise in mental fencing. You had to keep your emotions guarded, tightly wrapped up, so you could focus on the task. Nurse Duncan, bless her heart, used to hum show tunes while she worked, saying it kept the dark thoughts out. I mostly just focused on the meticulous details, temperature charts, fluid levels, drainage tubes, the precise mixing of sulfa powder. But the nights were different. The nights were when the atmosphere settled down, when the administrative frenzy of getting the wounded processed gave way to the deep, heavy breathing of men trying to heal. It was cooler then too, which was a blessing. July in France was baking us under the canvas. On the 3rd night of your stay, the blackout was total again. It was one of those nights when the fog rolled in from the channel, mixing with the smoke from distant battles, making the air thick and strangely quiet. I was checking vitals near your cot, just resting my hand on the cool metal frame when you whispered my name. Nurse Brooks? Evelyn? She, I said softly. I'm right here. Are you feeling any pain? No more than usual, you replied. I was just trying to remember what a movie theater looked like. Before. That was the remarkable thing about our talks. We never talked about how you got hurt, or what unit you were with, or what you saw on the beach. You seemed to instinctively know that I couldn't handle those details, and I knew that you needed a place where those memories couldn't follow. We built a little fragile world between the 3rd cot and the tent wall, constructed entirely of mundane, gentle things. That night, we talked about movies. You were partial to adventure serials, the ones where the hero always got away in the nick of time. But you confessed a deep love for musicals, the kind with Busby Berkeley's sweeping sets and elaborate choreography. You told me about the time you waited in line for 3 hours to see Yankee Doodle Dandy back in '42. It felt important then, you said. Like we needed to remember how loud and bright America was. I told you about the tiny, dusty movie house back in my hometown of Defiance, Ohio. We had sticky floors and popcorn that always tasted faintly of machine oil, but on Saturday afternoons, it felt like the center of the universe. I told you about my favorite actresses, Ginger Rogers, always graceful, always strong. She looks like she could fight a war in high heels and not chip her nail polish, you observed. I smiled in the darkness. She probably could. We all have our armor, don't we? There was a long silence then, just the sound of the fog dripping off the tent flaps. Do you think we'll ever have sticky theater floors again, Nurse Brooks? You asked. It wasn't a philosophical question. It sounded profoundly earnest. Of course, I assured you, placing my hand lightly on your forehead, checking for fever. The sticky floors are guaranteed. That's what all this noise is about, isn't it? Making sure there's still a place for sticky floors and terrible popcorn. It was a small lie. Maybe it was the most important truth I could offer you right then. We needed those promises, didn't we? The promise of the ordinary, the tedious, the utterly safe return. July 3rd, 1944. I'm sorry, I should introduce you properly, shouldn't I? But I can't. I lost your tag. When you were moved, Nurse Donovan was assisting, and there was a sudden surge of priority cases coming in from the forward area. The whole unit shifted gears in about 15 seconds. In the rush of checking your bandages one last time, making sure your morphine drip was ready for the transport ride, and signing off the manifest. I must have misplaced the small, handwritten paper where I'd copied your name from my own records. It feels unforgivable now, like I carelessly dropped a piece of your identity into the French mud. But even without the name, I remember the details of your face, visible only in the faint light of those evenings. You were young, certainly maybe 21 or 22. Your hair was dark and curly, plastered down with sweat when you arrived. But it was your eyes that held the attention, a strange mix of clarity and exhaustion. They were wide, watchful eyes, the kind that took everything in but gave little back. One night, the conversation turned to home, which was a dangerous topic, but we navigated it carefully, skirting around families and loved ones. Do you miss anything specific about home? I asked you, leaning against the central support pole of the tent. You thought about it for a long time. The bombing had been particularly intense a few hours earlier, distant but noticeable, shaking the ground slightly, and the tent was utterly silent now. The smell of wet concrete, you finally said. I remember being perplexed. Wet concrete? That's an odd thing to miss. Not really, you explained patiently. I grew up in an apartment building in Chicago. I used to go down to the alley behind the building on hot summer days. The alley was always cool, shaded by the buildings, and they'd wash it down with a hose sometimes. The smell of the water hitting the warm concrete and the faint smell of the garbage cans. It was just the smell of being safe and bored. You paused. I miss being safe and bored. I understood. The glamour of the war, the urgency, the supposed heroism, it all paled in comparison to the profound, dull luxury of being safe and bored. I missed the sound of my mother washing dishes in the sink, the clatter of silverware, and the endless running commentary she provided on the neighbors. I missed the weight of my grandmother's old, heavy iron on wash day, safe and utterly predictable. We both fell silent after that, just contemplating the immense gulf between the sounds and smells of that canvas tent and the memory of wet concrete in a Chicago alley. I wanted to tell you that you would go back to that alley, that you would lean against that cool concrete wall again. But I couldn't lie to you about the future. Instead, I just checked your pulse again, a gentle confirmation of life. Get some rest, I instructed. We have a long day ahead of us. You closed your eyes, but before you slipped back toward sleep, you whispered something that sounded like, "Keep the sticky floors safe, Nurse Brooks." And I promised you I would. July 4th, 1944, Independence Day. It is strange how arbitrary dates become when you're redealing with the constant flow of trauma. The 4th of July, back home, there would be parades and picnics and fireworks lighting up the Midwestern sky. Here, we have the low, constant rumble of artillery and the ever-present knowledge that men were dying just over the horizon. We tried, though. We found a few tins of preserved peaches, and one of the kitchen staff somehow managed to scrounge up a stale loaf of bread. We called it a celebration. The men were quiet during the day, resting mostly, preparing for the next push or the next transfer. You were feeling better. Your temperature was down, the wound was clean, and your color was returning. You were restless, which was actually a very good sign. Restless men wanted to live. They wanted to get back to the boring smell of wet concrete. That night, it was quiet, miraculously quiet. There was no alert, no air raid. Just the sound of the wind flapping the tent and the distant cries of gulls confused by the unnatural coastal chaos. I was writing in my own journal, sitting on an upturned crate near the entrance to the tent. I kept the light source small, just a narrow beam, so as not to disturb the others. You watched me for a while, writing home, you finally asked. Something like that, I confessed. I couldn't tell you that what I was mostly writing about was the exhaustion, the impossibility of conveying the atmosphere here to my mother, or the profound sense of detachment I felt. Do you write letters often? Not letters, no. Mostly observations and lists, I said. I find lists very comforting. They impose order on things that feel hopelessly disordered. You chuckled softly, a dry, gentle sound. I like letters. Letters feel like time travel. You wrap up a moment and send it forward or backward. I suppose so, I mused. I tried writing a letter to a friend the other day, but I kept censoring myself. I couldn't tell her what it was really like. It would only worry her, and frankly, she wouldn't understand the mud anyway. You understood. The divide between the world we occupied in that tent and the world of home was already vast, and it was only widening. Tell me a story then, you requested. Since you're a good writer, according to your lists. I'm not a writer, I protested. I'm a medical technician who happens to keep track of things. No, you insisted. You have the storyteller's voice. It's calm. It makes everything sound like it's happening far away, even when it's right here. Tell me about the first time you realized you wanted to be a nurse. I had to think about that. It wasn't a dramatic conversion moment. It was mundane, predictable. My father had a terrible flu when I was about 10, I began, choosing my words carefully. He was home for 2 weeks, miserable, hot, and unable to read. I spent the time bringing him weak tea and keeping the light just right for him to rest. But mostly, I sat there and watched his chest rise and fall. I realized then that my job wasn't to fix the illness. That was the doctor's job. My job was to keep the world safe and quiet around him while he did the heavy lifting of healing. Just keeping the light right. That's all I ever wanted to do. You were quiet for a long moment after I finished. The silence was deeper than usual, heavier. That's a good story, you whispered. Thank you. I wish I could repay you for keeping the light right. You already have, I said automatically, but I didn't know how true that was until much later. Your presence, the quiet strength of your refusal to break, was a strange kind of sustenance. You were giving me back a piece of the predictable human world that the war had tried to steal. July 5th, 1944. The atmosphere changed today. We got orders to prepare for a large movement of stabilized patients to a larger hospital unit further south. That meant you would be leaving. I spent the whole morning focused on ensuring your transfer summary was flawless. I meticulously checked and rechecked the notes, verifying the dosage times and the precise location of the remaining shrapnel in your leg. It was a futile attempt to control the uncontrolled. If the paperwork was perfect, maybe the journey would be safe. If the paperwork was perfect, maybe you wouldn't disappear. I should have done something else. I should have insisted on your full name, demanded a family contact, or maybe just taken a moment during the day to tell you how much those quiet nighttime conversations had meant to me. But the atmosphere of the MASH unit doesn't allow for those kinds of sentimental pauses. We are professionals. We treat the injury, stabilize the man, and move him on. But Nurse Evelyn Brooks, the girl from Ohio, wanted to tell you that you mattered more than just a case number. That evening, the tent was loud with the business of packing. Orderlies were bringing in stretchers, nurses were dispensing final medications, and the noise of the generator outside seemed 10 times louder than usual. There was no quiet darkness for a conversation. I managed to get close to your cot just once, under the bright glow of the lantern we used for final checks. You're leaving tonight, I said, trying to sound purely administrative. You nodded, a brief, tired movement. I figured. I hear the sound of the truck engine warming up. A sound I won't miss. Good luck, I managed. I wanted to say something profound, something to match the intimacy of our dark talks, but all that came out was, I hope your journey is smooth, and that you feel better very soon. You looked right at me then, your eyes steady, even slightly amused. Thank you, Nurse Brooks, you said. For the sticky floors. That was it. That was our goodbye. No name exchanged, no promise made, just a shared, ridiculous code word for the promise of peace. They lifted you onto the stretcher maybe 20 minutes later. It was efficient, quick, and brutal in its efficiency. I watched them carry you out under the low canvas flap. You were facing away from me, bundled in blankets. And then you were gone. July 7th, 1944, I walked past the third cot this morning. It's occupied by a new patient now, a quiet paratrooper with a chest wound. I've introduced myself and started his chart. He's polite, distant, and doesn't seem to have much to say, not even during the brief, distant shelling we had early this morning. But your cot is still empty to me. That's when the letter started. I had the moment of profound quiet after midnight. After the shift change, the silence settling back in. I pulled out my journal, intending to write about the paratrooper, or maybe the supply shortage, but my pen moved on its own. I started writing to you. It felt necessary, like tending a wound that hadn't quite closed. If I kept talking to you, if I kept recounting the days, maybe you hadn't vanished completely. Maybe somewhere far away down the line of evacuation hospitals, a part of you is still listening to my calm, quiet voice. I decided to tell you about the things that had happened since you left, focusing on the sensory details that would ground you back in this specific place and time. Letter 1. My dearest unknown soldier, the sun sets differently now. Maybe it's the dust kicked up by the thousands of trucks, or maybe the smoke that lingers high in the atmosphere, but the light is thicker, more orange. Last night, Nurse Duncan and I stood outside the tent for 5 minutes, just watching the colors. They were beautiful, but there was something terrible about them too, like the sky was bleeding orange onto the horizon. I wanted to tell you how the light hit the tops of the apple trees nearby, the ones that miraculously survived the shelling. They're not blooming now, but the leaves look like silver against that terrible sunset. We got fresh supplies today. Real coffee, not the watery stuff we've been brewing. It tastes like home, rich and dark, and I drank a whole cup, steaming hot, pretending I was back in the dining hall, not standing on a dirt track in France. I wanted to share it with you. You would have liked the smell. The rumor is that the Allies are moving south faster than anticipated. Every mile they advance means we are safer here, but it also means the men arriving are tougher, more exhausted, and the distance between us grows. I hope wherever you landed, the nurses are keeping the lights just right for you. I keep looking for your name on the casualty list, even though I know I wouldn't recognize it. I look for leg injury, shrapnel, immediate evacuation, and try to piece the puzzle together. I should stop, I know. It's fruitless, but I can't shake the feeling that if I search hard enough, I can reverse the flow of the river and pull you back to the safety of the third cot. It's quiet now. Good night. I'll write tomorrow. July 10th, 1944. It is the weight of the unknown that is the heaviest burden of all. If I knew you were safe, recovering in a comfortable bed in England, or perhaps in a rear area hospital in France, I could stop this. If I knew you had passed away on the road, I could mourn you and move on, but I have neither peace nor closure. You simply evaporated into the logistics of war, and the guilt sits here with me. I was the last person you talked to, truly talked to, before you left the MASH unit. We shared secrets, not big secrets, but the quiet, essential ones about sticky floors and movie theaters, and I didn't even know your last name. My days are a blur of work. The unit is busy, always busy. We manage shock, we stop bleeding, we prepare for the next wave. But the moments I look forward to are the ones after midnight, when the pen meets the paper. That's when I get to step back into the dimly lit, safe world we built together. Letter 2. My dearest unknown soldier, I'm writing this while the generator outside is struggling. It makes this complaining, high-pitched whine that sounds like a tired old dog. I've never noticed it before, but tonight, it's dominating the night. It makes me think about noise and how quickly we adjust to unbearable sounds. When I first got here, every truck engine, every distant burst of machine gun fire felt like a personal attack, Now, the silence is what feels dangerous. Do you remember the night we talked about music? The night the rain was so heavy it was deafening. You said you missed the sound of an orchestra tuning up, the chaotic screech before the beautiful harmony. I told you I missed the radio, the static, and the cheerful, insistent voice of the announcer promising a better future. I was thinking about that today when I was cleaning up a new set of instruments. They clattered in the pan, a sharp metallic sound, and I realized that everything here is about dissonance. The sound of life being saved is loud and jarring. There's no soft harmony at a field hospital, just the brutal, necessary sounds of maintenance. I wish you could hear the quiet, though. The nights when the bombing stops and the traffic slows down. It's a deep country silence, interrupted only by the rustling of the nurses moving between cots. It's the silence of exhaustion, but it's also the silence of healing. I hope you're hearing true silence now, the kind that lets your mind empty out. I sometimes imagine you on the transport plane, maybe looking out the window, seeing the coastline fade. I hope you had enough blankets. It gets cold flying over the channel, even in summer. I worry about the cold. I miss your perspective on things, your ability to see the strange humor in the grim reality. You were the one who pointed out that the Army issued us heavy wool socks even in July, as if they expected us to have cold feet in the middle of a furnace. Small observations, but they stick. I still look up at the flap of the tent when I hear a soft step. Good night. Try not to think about the wool socks. July 15th, 1944. The tent hospital expanded again. We took down a few apple trees to make room for 4 more receiving bays. It felt necessary, but sad. The small, green orchard was the only piece of genuine nature we had left, and now it's gone, replaced by more canvas and ropes. I've been working 16-hour shifts lately. Everyone is tired. Nurse Duncan snapped at an orderly yesterday, and we all pretended we didn't hear it. We're running on fumes, and the memory of the coffee I wrote to you about. During a brief moment of mandated rest this afternoon, I sat behind the kitchen tent, leaning against a stack of empty K-ration boxes. I closed my eyes and tried to remember what my own house smelled like. Dust and floor wax, mostly, nothing exotic. It was comforting, the blandness of it. I realized that what you and I did in those 7 nights was essentially an exercise in forced memory. We were desperately constructing a scaffolding of the past and the future to keep the crushing weight of the present from flattening us. You needed to remember the theater. I needed to believe in the order of lists. And now I'm the only one holding up the structure. Letter 3, my dearest unknown soldier. We're still here, still moving forward. It feels like we're tethered to the front lines by an invisible, taut string. We pull supplies in, we push wounded out. The air raids have changed. They aren't the sudden, terrifying bursts of noise they were 2 weeks ago. Now they're strategic, methodical, and often happen during the day, far away. We hear the planes high up, humming like angry insects, and we know they aren't coming for us, but for the men fighting further on. The safety of that distance feels like a betrayal. Do you remember the 6th night? The night we talked about fear. You confessed that your greatest fear wasn't dying, but coming home completely changed. You worried that you would look at your family and not recognize them, or worse, that they would look at you and see a stranger. I told you that everyone changes, even those of us who stayed behind. I admitted that I was terrified of going back to Defiance and finding that the world there was too small now. Too clean, too quiet, too uninterested in the way the horizon bleeds orange. We both admitted in the dark that we were scared of peace because peace meant facing the gap between who we were and who we had become. You said maybe the trick is to carry the tent with us. The space where the darkness is safe, I've held on to that. I carry the memory of that tent, that cot, and the low, careful sound of your voice. It's the closest thing I have to a talisman. Today, one of the orderlies found an old picture tucked into a bedroll left behind by a transferred officer. It was a picture of a smiling young woman holding a dog. Such an utterly civilian picture. I looked at it for a long time. It felt like something fragile and precious, salvaged from a terrible wreck. I hope someone is holding onto a picture of you, cherishing the memory of your civilian self. I wish I had a photograph of you. All I have is the shape of your cot and the sound of your voice asking about wet concrete. I will keep writing. Don't vanish completely. July 20th, 1944. The heat is oppressive. We are struggling to keep the tents cool and the wound dressings dry. There's a constant battle against dust and flies, the twin enemies of hygiene. I received a letter from my mother today, the first one that made it through in weeks. It was filled with chatter about ration stamps and the local church picnic. It was so innocent, so utterly disconnected from the reality of this landscape. When I read the line, "I hope you are resting and getting plenty of sunshine," I nearly laughed. Sunshine here means heat stroke and increased risk of infection. I realized then how deep the separation goes. I can write lists and observations, but I can't bridge that chasm with ink. The only person who truly understood the texture of this particular life was you. I wonder if you've been able to write home yet. I hope you told them about the sticky floors. Letter 4. My dearest unknown soldier, we had an accident in the kitchen this morning. A large drum of drinking water tipped over, flooding the ground near the surgical tent. It was quickly soaked up by the thirsty French dirt, but for a few minutes, there was a running stream, clear and cool, cutting through the mud. It was the most beautiful thing I've seen since I arrived in Normandy. It made me think about clean things, simple things. The purity of just running water. Do you remember the story you told me about the rain barrel at your grandmother's house? You said she used to collect rainwater for washing her hair because it made it softer. You described sitting on the back step while she brushed her long, dark hair, the smell of damp wool and lilac soap. You said that memory was what kept you calm on the transport ship crossing the Atlantic, the promise of the soft things. That memory felt so precious, so fragile, shared in the low light of our tent. It was a perfect piece of civilian life, completely unmarred by metal or noise. I want to believe you are somewhere now, maybe even sitting with that grandmother, smelling lilac soap. But I have no evidence. I just have the image of your face, momentarily illuminated by a flash of distant lightning on the second night. You weren't smiling, but you weren't afraid either. You were just present. I'm trying to focus on the work. Focusing is the only way to endure. We had a soldier arrive today, maybe 18 years old, who kept asking if his glasses were broken. They weren't. It was his eyes that were damaged by shock. I spent an hour just reading him the newspaper, slowly, gently, until he finally fell asleep. It wasn't surgical nursing, but it was necessary. It was keeping the light right. I wish I could read you this letter. I wish I could hear your dry comment about the state of our local French newspaper. Good night. The generator is steady now. July 25th, 1944. It's been almost 3 weeks since you left. The unit has moved slightly closer to the highway, improving our supply lines. Your specific cot is gone now, absorbed into a larger convalescent bay. The physical evidence of your stay has been erased by the relentless forward movement of the operation. This makes the act of writing these letters even more urgent. If I stop, if I let the routine consume the memory, then you are truly lost. I must keep the shape of the third cot alive. I had a dream about you last night. We weren't in the tent. We were on a high hillside, overlooking a vast green valley. There was no mud, no noise, just the sound of the wind. You turned to me and handed me a small flat stone. You said, "This is the name. Don't lose it this time." And then I woke up, my hand clenched, empty. The dream was a terrible comfort. It reminded me that the fault was mine, the loss of your identity, and that the only way to recover it is to keep searching through memory. Letter 5. My dearest unknown soldier, the feeling of waiting is different now. Before D-Day, we waited for the beginning, for the terrible first step. After you left, I waited for news, for confirmation, for the logistical system to spit out a name. Now, I realize I am simply waiting for the past to stop being so clear. I had coffee with Nurse Riley this afternoon. She's been here since the beginning, and she's tough, practical. She told me I needed to stop carrying the weight of the men who move on. She said, "We are a port. We don't own the ships that sail through. We just fix their hull enough for the next journey." I tried to explain about the letters, but I couldn't. How could I explain that you weren't a ship, but a fragile bridge between who I was and who I needed to be? I remember our conversation about baseball. You were a Chicago Cubs fan, destined for heartbreak, you said, but stubbornly loyal. You talked about the smell of the grass on the field, the cracked leather of a glove. You spent a good 20 minutes describing the precise moment a fly ball hits the sweet spot of the bat. It was such a perfect, detailed recollection, full of sound and motion. And I realized you were doing the same thing I'm doing now. You were building a world of sensation to override the sensory input of the hospital. The baseball field was your sandbag barrier against the sound of distant shells. I asked you if you played often. You smiled, I think. It was too dark to be sure. You said you mostly sat in the cheap seats and kept score, but that mattered too. Keeping score, keeping track, it's all administration, isn't it? Trying to quantify something too vast to measure. I'm still keeping score. And tonight, the score is Evelyn is still waiting for a name. I hope the Cubs are having a good season, wherever you are reading the paper. Good night. Stay loyal. August 1st, 1944. The war has changed its character again. We're moving with more confidence now. The flow of patients is steady, but the initial desperation has faded, replaced by a grim determination. We feel less like a tiny life raft on a stormy ocean and more like a permanent fixture on the landscape. I found myself pausing today, folding laundry, a small, absurd domestic task amidst the chaos, and staring at the sky. It was perfectly blue, almost aggressively peaceful. I thought about our final, unspoken agreement, the necessity of the ordinary. I decided to write you about the mundane things I see every day. The things that shouldn't be here, but persist anyway. Letter 6, my dearest unknown soldier. There's a patch of wildflowers growing right between the mess tent and the latrine trench. They are tiny, purple and yellow things, and they smell faintly of honey. I don't know their names, but they are blooming with tremendous vigor. Despite the constant foot traffic and the occasional misplaced supply crate, they insist on life. I remember you mentioning how surprised you were by the normalcy of the French landscape, even right near the fighting. You said you expected everything to be blasted and gray, but instead, there were still cows grazing, and laundry hanging on lines in the villages. You thought the French people were impossibly brave, carrying on their ordinary lives while the battles raged. I told you that maybe it wasn't bravery, but necessity. You can't stop doing laundry just because there are tanks moving down the road. The clothes still get dirty. The flowers still bloom. I see that same stubborn persistence in the men who pass through here. Even when they are near collapse, they ask about their cigarettes or their next meal. They cling to the small, predictable wants. I'm trying to cling too. I bought a small, chipped ceramic mug from a local woman who is selling salvage near the base perimeter. It's an ugly brown color, but it holds my coffee and it feels solid and heavy in my hand. It is a tangible piece of the world that isn't canvas or metal. I wonder if you found something similar. A smooth stone, a book, a new heavy mug. Something to anchor you to the small moment. I hope the nurses are good to you wherever you are. I hope they understand that sometimes the best medicine isn't the injection, but the quiet conversation about things that have nothing to do with injury. I will keep tending to the persistent flowers. Good night. Remember the soft things. August 10th, 1944, I had a brief, terrible moment of clarity this morning. I was cleaning out the storage area and I came across an old, crumpled manifest from the week you were here. It was covered in coffee stains and boot prints, but I managed to decipher a few of the handwritten names. My heart hammered when I saw the list of patients transferred on the night of July 5th. There were 8 names listed, all male, all marked stabilized. I scanned the columns, unit ID, age, nature, injury. I didn't recognize any of the names, but the details. One entry read, ME, age 22, GSW left tib fib post-op, severe shock. It could have been you. The age was right, the leg injury was correct, and the severe shock was certainly there. But there were no first names, only initials and last names. I memorized the initials, ME, then I realized I had committed the same error again. I have the initials, but still no way to confirm. There are thousands of men whose names begin with ME in the Army. I put the manifest back where I found it. I felt the deep, familiar exhaustion of a search that will never end. The military machine is vast, and its records are often dispersed or destroyed. I am trying to use a delicate needle to stitch together the fabric of war. The day proceeded as usual. I focused on the immediate, the tangible, changing dressings, charting temperatures, rationing morphine. But tonight, the memory feels sharper and fused with the frustration of getting so close and yet failing to connect. Letter 7, my dearest unknown soldier, ME. I feel ridiculous even writing those initials. It feels like guessing at a secret code that was never meant to be solved. But I saw a piece of paper today, evidence of your brief, documented time here. It confirmed everything I already knew, your age, the nature of your wounds, the swift efficiency of your transfer. It was a ghost of a paper trail, and yet I still don't know who you are. I remember the only time we came close to exchanging details. It was the night we talked about maps. You had been a keen amateur cartographer before the war, you said. Someone who loved lines and boundaries and the definitive shape of things. You said maps offered absolute comfort because they laid out the chaos in an understandable grid. I confess that I hated maps. I prefer narrative. I want to know the story of the place, not just the dimensions. I told you that being here in Normandy felt like being trapped inside a map that was constantly being redrawn by explosives. The comforting lines were all blurring. You said, but even the blurring is a pattern, Nurse Brooks. We just haven't found the key yet. I am searching for the key, ME. I am trying to use narrative to chart the map that your identity occupies. If I talk about you enough, if I describe the atmosphere of those 7 nights perfectly, maybe the map will snap back into focus. I think about the responsibility of your story. When you left, I was entrusted with the final chapter of your time here. The chapter where you were healing and talking about the smell of wet concrete. I have to honor that chapter, even if I can't write the rest of the book. We had a moment of calm suspense tonight. The radio crackled with news from the south. They're pushing hard. Every victory feels distant and fragile, bought at a high price. I hope your journey continued away from the fighting. It's time for rounds. I will check the new patient in the old location of the 3rd cot. He needs my full attention, but tonight, I wear the faint initials ME like an invisible dog tag. Good night. Don't worry about the lines on the map. August 15th, 1944. The unit is preparing for another move, advancing further inland. Everything is being packed, folded, and stacked into crates. The logistics of moving a massive tent hospital are overwhelming, a precise ballet of heavy lifting and frantic organization. As I was emptying my personal locker, I found the small, folded pieces of paper. All 7 of the letters I've written so far. They are brittle now, stained with coffee and the reddish French dust. They feel like heavy secrets. I cannot send them, and I cannot destroy them. They are the only enduring artifact of our conversations. I decided to keep them together, tucked into the sole remaining envelope I possess. They are waiting for you. I am sitting here now, the tent mostly empty around me, the sounds of hammers and dismantling dominating the air. I decided this must be the final letter written from this location. A farewell to the ground that held your cot. Letter 8, my dearest unknown soldier, M.E. This is the last letter I will write to you from this place. They're dismantling the unit around me. The tents are coming down, piece by piece, revealing the raw earth underneath. It smells like deep, overturned soil and diesel fuel. It feels like an ending, doesn't it? The physical trace of our time together is being erased. Soon, this field will just be a field again. The army will move on, and the French farmers will come back, and they will try to mend the scars we left in the earth. I realize today that the core of my anxiety about you, my profound guilt, is not about the letters or the name, but about the unspoken responsibility I carry. You were a repository of hope for me. During those air raids, when I was terrified, your calm, philosophical voice was my anchor. You were looking toward the future, sticky floors, soft rain, and I needed that tether to the world we were fighting for. When you were moved, that hope was taken away. I lost my permission to look forward, and I was left staring only at the present, the endless, grinding work. That's why I write, to recreate that calm space, that moment where we dared to talk about things that were gentle and utterly civilian. I pray that wherever you are no longer suffering from the severe shock we charted. I pray that you are finding yourself again, piece by piece. I promise you this. I will carry this letter and all the letters with me as we move on. They are now part of my personal inventory. I will continue to write, not just from Normandy, but from wherever the army sends me. And one day, perhaps the flow of the river will reverse and the name will find me. I hope the chaos of your transfer has ended. I hope you found your field of focus. The field is almost cleared. The canvas walls are gone. I am looking now at the exact spot where the third cot stood. It's just brown grass now, but I can still hear your voice. We are pulling out tomorrow morning, heading deeper into France. The mission continues, and I carry my box of unsent letters, waiting for the day I can address them properly. Good night. Be safe, M.A. I am thinking of you, and of all the quiet things we shared in the dark. August 20th, 1944, new location. We are set up again, slightly less frantically this time, in a large field bordered by tall poplars. The new tents are cleaner, the ground is drier. It feels further away from the initial terror of the beachhead, but the work is still the same. I've been reading the old letters. They remind me how young I was just 2 months ago, how naive I was about the nature of loss. I used to think the loss was only about death. Now I understand it's often about disappearance. I am back to my lists. They help anchor me. List of things I can control, my inventory of sterile gauze, the cleanliness of my instruments, the precise administration of medication, the clarity of my handwriting, the continuation of these letters. List of things I cannot control, the weather, the flow of the fighting, the eventual outcome of the war, your identity, M.E., the fate of the sticky floors. I will keep writing to you, even though the setting has changed. This is how I maintain the safe, dark tent of our conversation. Letter 9. My dearest unknown soldier, M.E. The trees here are tall and thin. Poplars, I think. They whisper constantly. It's a different sound than the sigh of the canvas we had before. That sound was intimate, close. This sound is vast, like the sigh of the entire French countryside. I was sitting under them today during a break. I closed my eyes and listened to the constant rustling, and I tried to conjure up the sound of that first air raid. The drumming rain, the distant thudding of the guns. The sounds are fading already, becoming historical. We talked about sounds once, didn't we? You said that the sound you missed most was the chaotic clatter of a busy diner, the hiss of the griddle, The low, unintelligible murmur of hurried conversations, the clink of ceramic cups. You miss the sound of too many people being in a hurry to get nowhere important. I remember telling you that I missed the sound of children playing, not in my specific memory, but just the generic sound of happy, unsupervised noise. We haven't heard much of that here. The few French children we see are silent, wide-eyed, watching us with a kind of ancient patience. I realized that night, talking to you, that we were both clinging to sounds that represented harmless inefficiency. The wasted sound of a fly ball hitting the bat, the clatter of unnecessary forks. The sounds of abundance, of life so easy it could afford to be loud. I hope wherever you are now, you are surrounded by the sound of harmless inefficiency. I hope you are sitting in a diner ordering something greasy and complaining about the clatter of the silverware. A new nurse arrived today, fresh from basic training. She is so bright and clean, so ready to be helpful. She reminds me of myself maybe 3 months ago. I didn't tell her about the mud or the exhaustion or the terrible orange sunsets. I told her where to find the clean linen. I kept the light right for her, too. I will continue this conversation tomorrow. The sound of the wind in the poplars is getting louder now, like a million soft voices. August 30th, 1944. The flow of time is accelerating. The news from Paris is electrifying. We feel the change, the palpable shift in momentum. It means more work, but it also means the end is closer. My letters to you have changed. They are less about the immediate, desperate present of the tent hospital and more about the strange, new reality that is unfolding. They are still unsent, still folded away in the envelope. They are still waiting. I find myself talking to you constantly in my head. When a soldier is discharged, walking out of the tent under his own power, I think, did you get to walk out under your own power, Emmy? When I see an orderly being careless with a file, I feel a spike of panic. That's how they lost the name. I carry the guilt of your uncertain fate. It is the heavy burden of the caretaker, the knowledge that you can stabilize the body, but you cannot guarantee the future. Letter 10, my dearest unknown soldier, Emmy. I was thinking about colors today. Everything here is olive drab, white, or mud brown. We try to inject color with the flowers or the occasional bright piece of packaging, but it never lasts. The canvas absorbs all the light and saturation. I asked you once about your favorite color, didn't I? It was a silly domestic question, out of place in our wartime world. You hesitated for a long time. You finally said, the color of a clean white shirt, starched just right, hanging in a closet. I asked why. You said that color, that particular white, represented the absolute absence of dirt, of stress, of combat. It was the color of a day when nothing bad was happening and nothing was expected. I remember finding that observation intensely moving. It wasn't about the grand colors of the world, the deep blue of the sky, or the vivid green of the fields. It was about the modest perfection of the mundane. The starched white shirt. I hope you are wearing a clean white shirt now, Mim. I hope you are somewhere very safe, where the greatest challenge of the day is deciding what to have for breakfast. We are starting to see the French countryside through civilian eyes again. The war is moving fast. The people we interact with are less guarded, more hopeful. There is a cautious sense of celebration beginning to settle over things. And I am watching it all, knowing that you and I talked about this day, the day the world would begin to breathe again. I wish I could tell you that the sticky floors are safe, Emmy. I wish I knew for certain that you made it home to worry about the clatter of silverware and the price of popcorn. That is all I need to know. I will write tomorrow. Until then, I hold the clean white shirt in my mind. September 5th, 1944. It's been over 2 months since you were evacuated. The memory is blurring slightly as Nurse Riley predicted. Your voice is becoming softer in my head, mixed now with the sounds of the other patients I've treated. But the gap, the missing piece of your name, remains as sharp as ever. I was thinking about the concept of part 2 today. We exist in a continuous narrative here, a relentless flow of events. But our quiet conversation, the one that ended abruptly on the transport stretcher, felt like a story that was broken right before the turning point. I am stuck in the prologue, constantly revisiting the atmosphere of the beginning, unable to leap into the central action of your recovery. I need to imagine the next steps to ensure the narrative continues, even if only on this piece of paper. Letter 11. My dearest unknown soldier, M.E. I have to tell you what I'm imagining. Since I can't know the truth, I've started writing your part 2 in my head. I imagine you arriving at the larger hospital in England, dazed and exhausted, but safe. The nurses there are British, crisp, and efficient, and they recognize immediately that you need rest more than anything else. You are given a quiet room, away from the sounds of the general ward. You sleep for maybe 36 hours straight. When you wake up, the first thing you notice is the bed. It's a real bed, not a cot, with sheets that smell faintly of lemon detergent. You look out the window and see a perfect English garden, impossibly green. You start your recovery slowly. You learn to walk again, first with a cane, then on your own. You make friends with the other convalescent men, but you still keep a piece of yourself separate. You don't tell them about the smell of wet concrete or the terrifying kindness of the nurse who kept the light, right? Those are your secrets. And one day, perhaps 6 months from now, you are declared fit for return to the States. You step onto the ship, and you realize you feel lighter than you have in years, not just physically, but morally. You carry the quiet with you. Then you are back in Chicago. You find your alley and you walk down it on a hot day. A city worker is hosing down the concrete and the smell rises, damp and familiar. And for the first time, you feel completely, profoundly safe. You realize the tent worked. The focus on the ordinary saved you. You think of the nurse who gave you the simple permission to talk about movies and baseball. You realize you never got her name or address either. You try to find her, but the records are hazy, obscured by the fog of war. You search for me, Emmy, just as relentlessly as I search for you. You realize we are both ghosts in each other's narratives, but that's okay. Because you are alive and you are home and you are worrying about the Cubs again. That is the happy ending I've scripted for you. I will keep writing to you from our next location, wherever that may be. The story of the sticky floors must continue. This is the lead into part 2, Emmy. I've given you the promise of safety, but I've kept the mystery of our connection. I hope the real story is just as gentle. Good night. I wish you peace and quiet. September 15th, 1944. We have moved again. The new location is further east, near a small, undamaged town. The contrast is jarring. In Normandy, everything was dirt and blast marks. Here, the grass is still green, the houses are intact, and the air smells like wood smoke and ripe apples, not exhaust and antiseptic. It feels unreal, like stepping onto a carefully constructed stage set where the drama has momentarily paused. The tents are up, the supplies are organized, and the rhythm of intake has begun again. But the psychological atmosphere is lighter. The fear isn't constant. It's a memory that rushes back only when the distant sound of heavy trucks shakes the ground. I've been trying to settle in. I moved my small, chipped brown mug, the one I wrote to you about, to the edge of my folding desk. It's the only truly personal item I display. It's an anchor. I brought out the envelope containing the 11 letters today. I ran my thumb over the thin paper. They are more than just letters now. They are a chronology of my own struggle for sanity during those first weeks. They hold the precise flavor of that mud and that fear. I decided I needed to write again, to update you on the changing map, the narrative that continues without us. Letter 12. My dearest unknown soldier, M.E. There is a bakery operating in the town nearby, a real one. I walked past it this morning while retrieving emergency supplies, and the smell of fresh bread yeast and caramelized crust was so overwhelming that I actually stopped, closed my eyes, and almost wept. Do you remember the day we talked about things we took for granted? The small sensory details that define normalcy. I don't recall if we spoke about bread specifically, but the scent today was so profound because it was the smell of peace, of routine, of a world that expects to wake up tomorrow and bake again. I realized, walking back through the tents, that the war takes the anticipation out of things. We never anticipate the good smells or the small comforts. We only anticipate the next shock, the next injury, the next impossible demand. To be able to expect the smell of bread tomorrow feels like an extravagant luxury. I hope wherever you are, you've eaten good food, something comforting, something that requires real flour and a real oven, not the tasteless biscuits we chew on here. The French people in this area are quieter than I expected. They wave, they offer smiles, but their eyes are watchful. They've seen too much to fully trust the calm yet. I feel kinship with them. We are all waiting for the other shoe to drop. I saw a woman today knitting near her window. The motion of her needles, rhythmic and precise, was intensely calming. It was the antithesis of the machine gun. It was slow, deliberate creation. I wonder if you've taken up any slow, deliberate creation in your recovery. Perhaps whittling or sketching. The war is now focused on cities far from here, and the field hospital feels less like a staging area and more like a long, reflective pause. The quiet is deep, almost too deep. It gives us too much time to think about the names we lost. I am keeping the silence safe for you. Good night. Enjoy your bread. September 25th, 1944. The autumn is arriving quickly. The nights are much colder. We've started lining the tents with extra tarpaulins to combat the damp, and the patients are wrapped in layers of blankets. The cold adds an element of difficulty to everything. Chilled hands struggle to manage fine sutures, and the smell of the damp earth seeps into the canvas. I find myself thinking about heat. Not just the physical warmth, but the warmth of sustained human connection. The heat we generated in the dark tent, talking through the raids, was a strange, protective thing. It was entirely internal. I missed that shared bubble of internal heat. Now, the warmth comes from duty, from action, which is colder. I've been assigned to administrative duties for a few days, processing discharge papers and casualty transfers. This work is tedious, demanding an intense focus on small, faded details. I treat every paper as if it holds the key to your location. I scour every manifest from early July, still nothing. The initial ME is too common, too frustratingly generic. I spent an hour looking up lists of names from the 4th Infantry Division, knowing only that they were heavily involved in the landing area near our first location. The names are all just typewritten columns of identity, none of them resonating with the voice that spoke about wet concrete. I feel like a librarian searching for a specific volume in a massive, darkened archive, holding only the memory of the cover. Letter 13. My dearest unknown soldier, M.E., I am experiencing boredom. Real, profound, administrative boredom. It's been a week of filing, checking, and rechecking stock numbers. And I realized today that I am grateful for it. We talked about the luxury of being safe and bored, didn't we? I remember you describing the scent of the cool concrete in your Chicago alley. That scent was intertwined with the state of being utterly, profoundly safe from urgency. Boredom here is a sign of operational success. It means the front lines are stable, the system is working, and the immediate need for emergency surgery has receded. Boredom is the sound of the war receding. I'm trying to embrace it. I'm focusing intensely on the tiny details of the paperwork, making sure the ink is legible, ensuring every blank is filled. This meticulousness feels like an act of rebellion against the chaos of the last few months. If I can control the paperwork, perhaps I can impose order on the larger world. I hope your boredom is delicious, May. I hope you are so bored right now that you're complaining about the weather or the price of stamps. That would be the best news I could possibly receive. We had a strange incident today. A small cat, thin and shy, wandered into the tent. It sniffed around the supply crates and then, completely unafraid, it jumped onto a desk and began washing itself right next to the stacks of casualty reports. It was an astonishing display of natural indifference to military bureaucracy. I watched it for 10 minutes. It didn't belong, but it was insistent on its presence. When Nurse Duncan shooed it out gently, I felt a small, disproportionate pang of loss. It was another sign of the persistent, quiet life that continues regardless of the violence. I want you to be like that cat M.E., persistent, safe, and utterly unconcerned with the paperwork we left behind. I'm going back to my files now. I will check every name again. Good night. May your day be utterly boring. October 7th, 1944. The routine is now solidified. We are functioning like a well-oiled machine, efficient and emotionally muted. The new patients are often injuries related to logistics accidents, fatigue, minor frostbite, a shift away from the massive trauma of the initial invasion. I've learned to manage my emotions through detachment. I focus entirely on the physical body in front of me, the breath, the pulse, the wound. The narrative of the man, his home, his fears, his future that is stored safely away, not allowed to interfere with the necessary tasks. But the letters remain my indulgence. They are the only time I allow myself to move beyond the physical and tend to the emotional landscape of the war. I started thinking today about how the war has distorted our sense of distance. America feels impossibly far away, separated by a vast ocean and an even vaster difference in experience. Yet UME, separated only by a few hundred miles and a missing piece of paper, feel profoundly closer. You are tethered to me by those 7 nights of shared fear and quiet reflection. Letter 14. My dearest unknown soldier, M.E. The mail arrived today, and it brought Christmas cards, absurdly early, and a few outdated magazines. I found myself staring at a picture of a supermarket aisle in a glossy periodical. Rows and rows of bright, colorful cans and boxes. It looked like an alien landscape. I remember we talked about the difference between distance and separation. Distance is just measurement the miles between us and Chicago or me and Ohio. Separation is something else. It is the widening of experience, the chasm that opens up between people who have seen too much and those who have been spared. I feel more separated from my mother and the woman on the glossy page than I do from you, sitting in the 3rd cot on the night of the air raid. You exist in the same emotional geography as I do. You saw the same sky, smelled the same fear, and experienced the same relief when the all-clear sounded. I am worried about crossing that separation when I finally go home. Will I know how to talk about anything that doesn't feel life or death? Will I remember how to care about things like canned soup or ration books? I keep rereading my mother's letters. She talks about the cold weather and needing new tires. These concerns are real, they are valid, but they exist in a different dimension. I feel like an anthropologist studying a lost civilization, my own. I hope your emotional geography is shrinking, M.E. I hope the line between here and home has blurred completely for you. I hope you are talking easily about the small, normal things with the people you love, seamlessly bridging the gap of separation. That is the real victory, isn't it? Not the lines on the map, but the lines of connection restored. The poplars are losing their leaves now. They sound crisp and brittle when the wind blows. Good night. Remember the sound of children playing. October 20th, 1944. The unit is busy again, preparing for the inevitable push as the war moves into heavier resistance areas. We are gathering medical supplies, checking inventory, and practicing new surgical procedures for handling injuries related to urban combat, which is a different kind of horror entirely. I try not to think about what the new patients will see. I try to remain focused on the geometry of the wound, the mechanics of healing. I had a moment of intense frustration yesterday. I was talking to the head nurse, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, about the difficulty of maintaining complete patient records during mass evacuations. She was sympathetic but purely administrative. "Lieutenant Brooks," she said, peering over her glasses. "In these circumstances, we prioritize the continuation of care. The transfer summary is the critical document. If a patient is stable and receives treatment based on that summary, the name is secondary to the life saved." Her words were true, professional, and entirely inadequate for the profound connection I felt to the man whose name I'd lost. I knew that in the grand scheme of the war, my guilt over your identity was a sentimental folly, but that folly was the core of my emotional survival. If the name is secondary to the life saved, then I must assume the life was saved, ME, and let the name go. But I cannot. Letter 15, my dearest unknown soldier, ME. I'm trying to move past the need for your name. I'm trying to accept the professional reality that your identity was sacrificed to the logistics of your survival. I'm trying to assume that because you were stable when you left, you continued to stabilize, and that you are now fine. But assumptions are a fragile scaffolding, ME. They are easily knocked down by the sight of a new patient who reminds me of your age, or the memory of the light hitting your face. I remember the night we talked about hope. I think it was the 5th night. We were discussing what we hoped to save, not just what we hoped to win. You said you hoped to save your capacity for being surprised by the ordinary. You said that the war was too predictable in its violence, and that you wanted to return to a world where a sudden rainstorm or finding a lost coin could still feel like an event. I told you that I hoped to save my capacity for precision. I feared that the constant barrage of chaos would dull my focus, making me careless, or worse, indifferent. I feared I would forget how to keep the light just right. I am holding on to that precision. ME, I measure every dose. I write every chart clearly, and I fold every one of these letters with the exact same crease. I realize today that the letters are my precision. They are the act of focusing on a single precious memory amidst the vast, chaotic reality. They are the physical manifestation of saving the capacity for fine detail. I hope your life is full of surprises now. Pick a kind. The unexpected rainstorm, the forgotten birthday card, the moment of grace that is entirely unearned. We are moving soon, further east, further into the conflict. I carry my small envelope, waiting for the story of the sticky floors to resume. Good night, be surprised. November 1st, 1944. The cold has intensified. We are now wearing multiple layers, moving stiffly through the frozen landscape. The war is moving into a bitter, prolonged phase. We are treating more cases of simple fatigue and exposure than pure combat wounds, though those still arrive with brutal regularity. This phase of the war feels relentless, heavier than the summer sprint. We are all deeply tired, the kind of exhaustion that settles into the bones and makes movement difficult. I have found myself daydreaming more often about your Chicago alley. The cool concrete, the shade, the safety. It feels like an image of paradise now, a place defined by its utter lack of military urgency. I met a man today, a supply officer named Major Thompson. He was sorting through old administrative files in a nearby depot, the kind of lost paperwork that makes my heart race. He was a meticulous man, obsessed with making order out of the chaos of Army logistics. I asked him casually about the transfers that took place out of the Normandy sector in early July. I described the urgency, the missing manifests, the difficulty of tracking stabilized cases moving to the rear via multiple transport legs. He listened patiently, his face stern. "Lieutenant Brooks," he said, his voice flat. For a period in July, records were a disaster. If a man was marked stabilized and moved out, he ceased to be the concern of the forward area. There are hundreds, maybe thousands, who slipped through the cracks of the paperwork. We prioritized the living over the listing. He confirmed everything I feared. The paper trail, if it existed at all, was likely dispersed across half a dozen commands, archived under different codes, or simply lost to the mud. My search felt futile again. Letter 16. My dearest unknown soldier, M.E. I spoke to a supply officer today, a man who worships order. He confirmed the terrible logic of wartime loss. He told me that your name wasn't lost because of negligence, but because of prioritization. Your life was deemed more important than your label. It is a cold comfort, M.E. I understand the professionalism, but I struggle with the human cost of that administrative efficiency. It means that the memory we shared, the connection we forged, remains officially undocumented. I remember talking to you about the logic of things. You were a cartographer obsessed with lines, and you needed the world to make sense. I remember you tried to rationalize the shelling, finding patterns in the timing, hoping to reduce the terror to a mathematical equation. I told you that war defies logic, that the only sensible thing to do was accept the irrationality of it all. Now I am trying to impose logic on our silence. I'm trying to accept that the silence means safety. If I haven't heard any final terrible news, then the lack of a name must signify success. The efficient machine saved the body, even if it erased the identifying details. I keep thinking about the weight of the air during those raids. The atmosphere was so thick with fear that it felt like we were breathing water. And yet, in that heavy atmosphere, you talked about baseball and concrete. I am trying to replicate that balance now. The heavy atmosphere of the winter war, balanced by the light, persistent memory of our quiet space. I am reading books again, heavy novels that require intense focus. They are a good way to anchor the mind when the world outside feels adrift. I wish I knew what you were reading now. Something light, I hope. Something that smells faintly of old paper and dust, not mud and fuel. I will keep the logic simple. Silence equals safety. Good night. Trust the math. November 15th, 1944. The cold has intensified. We are now wearing multiple layers, moving stiffly through the frozen landscape. The war is moving into a bitter, prolonged phase. We are treating more cases of simple fatigue and exposure than pure combat wounds, though those still arrive with brutal regularity. The emotional toll is visible on everyone. Our voices are softer, our movements slower. We are conserving energy, physical and psychological. I've started observing the small details of the environment again, just as I did in Normandy, searching for the absurd humor that helps break the tension. I noticed that the laundry lines, strung between the poplars, are always flapping in the wind, even when the items hanging on them are frozen stiff. They look like strange, abstract flags waving over the field hospital. Letter 17. My dearest unknown soldier, M.E., we are waging a constant losing war against the mud and the cold. Everything is damp, everything is difficult, and yet the laundry still gets done. It is the most absurd detail of this relentless conflict. We are surrounded by death and destruction, and yet every day we must clean our sheets and sterilize our uniforms. The persistence of basic hygiene feels almost insulting to the grand scale of the violence. I was watching the frozen laundry snap in the wind today, and I remembered talking to you about the sheer necessity of the mundane. You mentioned how, even on the transport ship heading over, the cooks still complained about the quality of the potatoes. The potatoes still matter, the clean sheets still matter. Because these small, repeatable acts of normalcy are the only weapons we have against the psychological erosion of the war. I hope you are seeing your laundry done now, perhaps by your mother or a kind friend. I hope you are folding your clothes neatly, appreciating the absolute absence of mud and the presence of warmth. I often wonder if you ever think about those 7 nights. Do they surface in your memory as clearly as they do in mine? Or were they just a brief, necessary distraction during a difficult time, conversation you shed easily when you left the tent. I hope they were necessary for you too. I hope that when the shock was too great, you could pull up the memory of our quiet arguments about Ginger Rogers or the clatter of silverware in a busy diner. I hope I served a dual purpose, M.E., not just as the nurse who tended the body, but as the quiet voice who tended the spirit, even if only for a week. The snow was starting to fall now, light and dusting. It makes the camp strangely beautiful, obscuring the mud and softening the outlines of the tents. Good night. May your clothes be dry and your hands be warm. December 5th, 1944. The weather has become brutal. Snow and freezing rain make movement treacherous. The war has settled into a harsh stalemate in many sectors, and our workload reflects that sporadic, intense surges followed by long, agonizing lulls. During one of the lulls, I received a small, unexpected gift from a kind, elderly French woman whose life we saved during an emergency triage event near her farm. It was a tiny, smooth, brown leather-bound journal. It was empty except for a faint, clean smell of old paper. I decided this would be the final, permanent repository for the letters. The envelope was becoming too fragile. I carefully transcribed the existing 11 letters into the journal, taking my time, savoring the slow rereading of our conversations. As I copied the final entry, letter 11, the soft cliffhanger, I realized I was actively preserving a fiction, my imagined happy ending for you, but I need that fiction. It provides the necessary structure for my hope. Letter 18, my dearest unknown soldier, Emmy. Your letters have found a new home. I have moved them from the fragile envelope into a small, sturdy journal, a gift from a grateful woman. It feels like an important administrative step making the archive permanent. I remember talking to you about preservation. You were fascinated by how ancient maps survived, folded away, only to resurface centuries later, still holding the truth of a forgotten landscape. I told you that nurses preserve life in the moment. Our work is urgent, immediate, and often vanishes into the next task. But now, I realize that I am also preserving this connection. This journal is my attempt to ensure that the landscape of our shared fear survives. The act of copying the entries was strange. I could hear my voice and yours echoing off the pages. I am grateful that our conversations were never about the specific horrors of the war. They were about continuity, the cups, Ginger Rogers, the smell of lilac soap. We were experts in conversational evasion, creating a sanctuary of the irrelevant. I worry about the men who couldn't evade the memories, me, the ones who came through here and could only talk about the violence. I pray they found someone to help them find their way back to the smell of bread. We are bracing for a difficult winter. The supplies are running thin and the weather is isolating. It feels like the whole world has retreated into itself. I am relying on the archive now, I am rereading our list of shared mundane promises. The sticky floors, the wet concrete, the starched white shirt. Thank you for giving me these things to preserve. They are more valuable than gold. Good night. Be safe in the cold. December 20th, 1944. The atmosphere is tense. The news is bad. The sudden, brutal counterattack in the Ardennes has sent a shudder through the rear area. We are preparing for the worst mass casualties emergency triage, the frantic pace of the summer returning in the harsh conditions of winter. The fear is different this time. It is a calculated, professional fear based on historical casualty rates and logistical planning. But underneath the professionalism, there is the raw, cold terror of disruption. The letters I write tonight are brief, urgent, and focused on maintaining a psychological tether to reality. I need the memory of your calm voice now more than ever. Letter 19. My dearest unknown soldier, Mimi. The noise is back. Not the immediate, overhead threat of the initial raids, but the distant, sustained thunder of intense conflict. The trucks are moving constantly, louder than ever. The generator is overworked. We are preparing for a massive intake. Every nurse is focused, grim. There is no time for small talk or reflection, only action. I thought about our conversations about the waiting. The silence between the noise, you called it. That silence is gone now. It is all noise, all the time. The physical energy of the battle is vibrating through the earth. I am keeping the memories close, ME. I am forcing my mind to focus on the quiet darkness of the third cot, the low rhythm of our voices, talking about things that didn't matter, which made them matter completely. I hope you are far from this now. I hope your recovery is complete and that the noise in your life is limited to the clatter of a busy diner. I had to make a difficult choice today about a patient's life support, a decision that required absolute clarity and detachment. I made the decision correctly, I believe, based on the highest standards of care. But afterward, I stood by my desk and focused on the feel of your leather-bound journal in my hand, trying to recenter myself on the human, messy part of this duty. We have to be machines right now, fast, efficient, emotionless machines. But the journal reminds me of the human voice underneath the uniform. I will write again when the influx subsides. I am too busy to talk about sticky floors tonight, but know that I am holding the line here. Good night. Stay safe. January 5th, 1945, we survived the wave. The influx was brutal, demanding every ounce of our training and stamina. The days blurred into one long, cold, painful shift. But we did the work. We stabilized, treated, and moved the injured. We kept the light right, even when the power flickered and the cold threatened to freeze the instruments. Now, the crisis has eased, but a unit is exhausted but functional. The silence has returned, not the calm silence of September, but a heavy, saturated silence, weighted by all the work and the loss we just processed. I haven't written for weeks. I didn't have the space, the quiet, or the necessary emotional distance. Tonight, I sit with the journal, feeling the need to catch up, to process the recent trauma through the lens of our shared past. Letter 20, my dearest unknown soldier, ME, we are profoundly tired. The kind of tiredness that makes you forget simple words and wonder if you will ever feel warmth again. This winter war is different. It drains the spirit, not just the body. I remember we talked about physical exhaustion once early on. You were worried that your wound would make you seem weak in front of your unit. You said you wanted to appear tough, resilient. I told you that true strength wasn't about appearing impervious, but about enduring the inevitable pain and still managing to move forward. That strength was in the precision of breathing, in the small, controlled movements of the body. I've been practicing that endurance for the last 2 weeks, focusing on the breath, one step at a time, one procedure at a time. It works, it truly does. You can compartmentalize the pain of the world if you focus hard enough on the immediate tiny task. But when the work stops, the compartments crack open, and I am left with the raw memory of the last 2 weeks, the terrible things men endured in the cold. I need your optimism now, ME, the kind of optimism that could find the humor in wool socks during a summer invasion. Tell me a story about a diner. Tell me about the quality of the potatoes. Tell me that the sticky floors are waiting for us. I am worried that I have lost some of my capacity for the ordinary. I worry that the sheer volume of suffering has made me too hard, too efficient. That I will go home and won't know how to relax my face into a normal civilian smile. I will rely on the archive, ME, and on the memory of your calm voice in the dark. I need to remember that the point of this endurance is the return to the gentle, messy inefficiency of normal life. Good night. Find the warmth. February 1st, 1945. The tide has turned again. The threat of the counterattack has receded, and the news is once again focused on the advance. The air in the camp is slowly shifting from desperation to anticipation. We had a brief moment of real civilian interaction today. A small traveling troupe of USO performers, delayed by the weather, stopped by to put on a show for the convalescent men. It was a chaotic, enthusiastic, unprofessional mess of singing and bad jokes. It was glorious. I stood in the back, watching the men laugh, and felt a profound sense of cultural displacement. The jokes were about things that felt a decade away, traffic jams and apartment rent, but the laughter was real. It was a powerful reminder of the world waiting for us. The world that manufactured this gentle, loud, unnecessary entertainment. Letter 21. My dearest unknown soldier, Emmy. We heard laughter today. Loud, unrestrained, American laughter. It was the best medicine the field hospital has received all year. It was strange, though. The jokes were about things that no longer felt relevant. They were about the trivial anxieties of pre-war life. And yet, seeing the men react genuinely, warmly made me realize the resilience of the human spirit. I remember we talked about musicals. You loved the sweeping sets, the ridiculous choreography. I loved the utter, unrealistic optimism of it all. The idea that happiness could be conveyed through synchronized movement. The USO show was like a small, dusty version of that optimism. It didn't try to make sense of the war. It simply insisted that there was a vibrant, loud, funny world waiting on the other side. I hope your life is full of music now, Mimi. I hope you are sitting in a theater with sticky floors, watching a terrible, beautiful musical and laughing without restraint. The show reminded me of the profound difference between the performance of war, the heroism, the urgency, and the performance of peace, the absurdity, the exaggeration, the unnecessary drama of entertainment. We are professionals in the performance of duty, but I hope we remember how to be enthusiastic amateurs in the performance of life. I saw one of the older, quieter patients wiping a tear from his eye while the singer belted out a terrible rendition of Sentimental Journey. It wasn't sadness. It was recognition. Recognition of the simple things that endure. We are enduring, M.E. We are moving toward the light, however slowly. Good night. Remember the music. March 1st, 1945. The snow is melting, revealing the mud once more, but this time the mud feels different. It feels transitional, temporary. Spring is approaching. The nature of the war is changing again. We are treating more liberated civilians and displaced persons now, men and women who have endured years of quiet deprivation. Their wounds are often invisible, psychological, or related to malnutrition. This work requires a different kind of nursing, less surgical precision, more patient, careful kindness. We are treating the damage left by the occupation, the slow, grinding injury of years of silence. I realize that my letters to you, Emmy, are also a form of treating an invisible wound, the psychological damage of separation and lack of closure. By maintaining the routine, I am forcing myself to practice patience and kindness toward my own past. Letter 22, my dearest unknown soldier, Emmy. The ground is soft again. We are surrounded by mud, but this mud is different from the red, sticky paste of Normandy. This mud holds the promise of the things that will grow when it dries. I remember we talked about the patience required for healing. You were frustrated by the slow, bureaucratic process of your recovery, the waiting for stable vital signs, the waiting for the transport, the waiting for the bone to knit. I told you that true patience wasn't passive. It was the active work of trusting the process. It was about creating the perfect environment for the body to do the hard work of repair without rushing it. I feel like we are entering a phase of patient waiting now, Mimi. The hard, immediate action is receding, and we are waiting for the world to heal, waiting for the supply lines to stabilize, waiting for the peace treaties to be signed, waiting for the displaced people to find their homes. This patience is difficult. It requires constant self-discipline to prevent anxiety from taking over. We are so accustomed to urgency that the slowness of the world feels suspicious. I hope your patience paid off. Yeah, I hope you endured the tedium of recovery and allowed your body and mind the full, necessary time to heal. I had a small, private victory today. I helped an elderly French woman find a scrap of lace that had belonged to her mother. It was tucked into the lining of a blanket she had been carrying for 5 years. The sheer joy on her face over this tiny, unimportant piece of cloth was illuminating. It reminded me that the value of things is not in their material worth, but in the memories they carry. These letters, M.E., are my scrap of lace. They are proof that something soft and precious survived the war. We are almost through this. Be patient. Good night. Trust the spring. April 1st, 1945. The final push is happening now. We feel the surge of Allied energy. The patients arriving are often relieved, exhausted men, injured in the final clearing operations. The conversations in the ward are increasingly focused on the future train tickets, college plans, the specific flavors of ice cream they plan to consume upon arrival home. It is difficult to maintain professional neutrality when the anticipation is so infectious. I feel a growing ache of hope, a realization that my own journey home is imminent. But that hope is accompanied by the fear of the reunion, the fear of the separation I spoke of earlier. Will I fit back into Defiance, Ohio? Will the world there feel too small after living on this vast, shifting landscape? And always the question of you, M.E., if I am going home, am I abandoning the final, necessary chapter of our shared narrative? Letter 23. My dearest unknown soldier, M.E., the map is nearly complete. The lines are snapping back into place. Everyone is talking about the geometry of the return routes home, the distance to travel, the precise location of their loved ones. I remember you loved maps. You loved the certainty of the borderlines. But the boundary I worry about most is the one between the person I am now and the person I left behind. I look at the young nurse I was in June, writing lists and trying to keep the light right, and she seems like a stranger. This Evelyn, the one writing this letter, is tougher, quieter, and knows too much about the color of a terrible sunset. I hope the journey home for you is a bridge, an E, not a sudden, jarring change. I hope you looked at your Chicago apartment building and recognized the window, the fire escape, and the specific angle of the sun in the afternoon. I hope you discovered that the people who love you are resilient, that they recognize the core of the man who talked about wet concrete, even if the exterior was a little scarred. We are starting the final packing procedures here. It is strangely bittersweet. We are closing down the operational chapter of our lives, preparing to open the recovery chapter. It feels like the end of a long, difficult semester. I carefully checked the leather-bound journal today. I made sure the pages were flat, the ink was dry, and the binding was secure. This book, M.E., is the vessel that holds my own hope for seamless transition. It is the proof that the experience here was not purely clinical, but deeply, irrevocably human. If I go home without a name, I will carry the story, and the story will be enough. Good night. May your route home be clear. April 20th, 1945. The final push is happening now. We feel the surge of Allied energy. The patients arriving are often relieved, exhausted men, injured in the final clearing operations. The conversations in the ward are increasingly focused on the future train tickets, college plans, the specific flavors of ice cream they plan to consume upon arrival home. It is difficult to maintain professional neutrality when the anticipation is so infectious. I feel a growing ache of hope, a realization that my own journey home is imminent, but that hope is accompanied by the fear of the reunion, the fear of the separation I spoke of earlier. Will I fit back into Defiance, Ohio? Will the world there feel too small after living on this vast, shifting landscape? And always the question of you, M.E. If I am going home, am I abandoning the final, necessary chapter of our shared narrative? Letter 24. My dearest unknown soldier, M.E., I am thinking about the weight we carry. Not the heavy crates or the field bags, but the invisible weight of the memories. I will carry the smell of the first Normandy mud, the sound of the generator whining on a cold night, the impossible orange of the bleeding sunset, and the feel of the canvas tent sighing in the rain. and I will carry the weight of your presence in the third cot. It is a weight I choose, M.E. It is the evidence that, even in the middle of chaos, a small space of profound, gentle human connection can be forged. You taught me that the opposite of war isn't peace. It's conversation. I remember telling you I loved lists. I'm writing one for you now, a final list of the things I learned from our brief time together. 1. The value of being safe and bored is immeasurable. 2. True heroism isn't enduring the ordinary, like dirty laundry and bad potatoes. 3. Never underestimate the power of a starched white shirt. 4. The promise of the sticky floor is worth fighting for. 5. A life saved is always more important than a name recorded. I accept that last point now. I may never know your full name, but I know the shape of your soul, illuminated in the dark. I know the man who missed the sound of an orchestra tuning up, and that knowledge is more concrete than any paperwork. I am releasing the guilt now. I did what I could. I kept the light right for you while you did the heavy lifting of healing. We are leaving France soon. I will be heading toward home, toward defiance, toward a world that waits to be redefined by peace. I will carry this journal home with me. It is the physical proof of my devotion to your memory. I hope you're reading this in spirit, M.E., somewhere safe, somewhere quiet. Good night, and thank you. May 8th, 1945, VE Day. The celebration here is restrained but genuine. There is immense relief, coupled with a deep shared exhaustion. The war in Europe is over. The silence is profound now, heavy and final. It feels like the end of the world and the beginning of the next one all at once. We are packing for our journey home. I am wrapping my small brown mug and placing the leather journal into my trunk. I feel an overwhelming sense of finality. The mission is complete. I wrote one last note in the journal today, not a letter, just a statement of closure, dedicated to the finality of this day. Wherever you are, I hope you are safe today. The fight is over. The silence is real. May you find the life you remembered. June 1945, staging area, England. I am waiting for my transport ship home. England feels impossibly distant from the fields of France, cleaner, quieter, older. We are processing our discharges, receiving new uniforms, preparing to step back onto American soil. The transition is strangely difficult. We are treated as heroes, but we feel like people who simply survived a very long, demanding job. The civilian world seems excessively loud, bright, and cheerful. I find myself speaking softly, still expecting to hear the canvas sigh above me. I decided to use this lull to try one final administrative search. I went to the main archive facility established near the port. It was a massive, bureaucratic building filled with endless rows of filing cabinets. I spent 3 hours politely explaining my situation to a sympathetic records officer. I explained that I was looking for a single soldier, stabilized, evacuated from a MASH unit near Normandy on July 5th, 1944. Age 22, initial severe shock, leg injury. Initials M.E., the officer, a kind older woman named Mrs. Davies, looked through the indices carefully. Lieutenant Brooks, she said finally, looking up, her face etched with professional fatigue. There are 4,000 transfers matching that injury and age criteria in the entire system for that month, and roughly 50 men with the initials M.E. who moved through the primary evacuation route you described. My heart sank. The paper trail was still too vast. I understand, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Thank many for your time. As I turned to leave, Mrs. Davies called out, "Wait, let me check the severe shock psychological hold manifest." Sometimes those men were rerouted for extended observation, which created an unusual secondary paper trail. She pulled a thick, separate folder. She ran her finger down a list, cross-referencing names against the date and injury type. She stopped at a line near the bottom. Ah, here is one. Initials M.E., age 22, transferred July 5th. last name Morgan, first name Elijah. Admitted to Special Convalescent Facility, Southampton. Marked stable, requires long-term observation. Discharged to the States, December 1944 via medical transport. Elijah Morgan. I felt a dizzying wave of certainty. It wasn't concrete proof, but the convergence of every detail, the initials, the age, the date, the specific injury, and the severe shock that necessitated extended observation. It was the definitive answer I had been searching for. The logistics had finally yielded to the narrative. "Thank you," I whispered. That's all I needed." I walked out of the archive building into the bright English sun, holding the name Elijah Morgan in my head. I had the closure. He was stable. He went home in December. My imagined part 2 was wrong about the timing, but right about the outcome. I knew I couldn't reach out. Not after this long, not having been just a nurse who treated hundreds of men. But I had the name. The name belonged in the archive. July 1945, aboard transport ship Atlantic. The journey home is long and slow. I spend hours on the deck watching the ocean. The vastness of the water is comforting. It is a clean, neutral slate. I took out the leather journal today. I opened it to the final blank page. I would not write another letter to him. I would write a final entry about him. I have a name now, Elijah Morgan. Age 22, Chicago. Stabilized and discharged home, December 1944. The search is over. The paper trail, though convoluted and nearly invisible, existed. The machine was slow, but it was not careless. It saved him, and eventually, it confirmed his fate for me. Knowing this brings a profound peace. The weight is lifted. The ghost is laid to rest. He is not a ghost, of course. He is a man who is likely complaining about the quality of the coffee and the loudness of the streetcars in Chicago right now. And that is the absolute best outcome. I will carry this journal for the rest of my life. It is the place where Nurse Evelyn Brooks and Soldier Elijah Morgan met, not in official capacity, but in the quiet shared space of human vulnerability. I hope he found his sticky floors. I hope he is safe and bored. I hope he remembers the light being just right. I will close this chapter now, tucking the memory securely into the permanent archive. My next journey is to find the civilian Evelyn Brooks, to relearn the sounds of safety, to integrate the toughness I gained here with the tenderness I left behind. I will carry the precision of my training and the knowledge that the quiet conversations matter most of all. Elijah, thank you. You gave me an anchor when I didn't know I was adrift. The journey home begins now. September 1945, Defiance, Ohio. The world is too bright. The colors of civilian life are overwhelming, the reds and blues of department store displays, the vivid green of the late summer lawns. The silence of the streets is almost frightening, a heavy contrast to the low, constant hum of the generator and the trucks. My mother is endlessly kind, trying to make the transition easy. But she doesn't understand the separation. She asks simple questions about whether I ate well, or if I liked the French countryside. How can I explain the smell of wet concrete? I have taken up my life again. I am working at the local hospital, the work familiar, but lacking the intense, desperate urgency of the mesh unit. I miss the adrenaline, the absolute clarity of purpose. Here, the work is long and methodical, dealing with the slow injuries of time and age, not the sudden brutality of war. I keep the journal tucked away in a small box, deep in my closet. I do not look at it often, but I know it is there. It is the key to the woman I became. I have found my precision again. I am meticulous in my work, caring for the elderly patients with an intense, quiet focus. I keep the light just right for them. One afternoon, I am reading the newspaper in the staff lounge, a civilian newspaper full of reports on baseball scores and local politics. My eyes scan the sports section, a habit I picked up while trying to entertain soldiers. I see a small article about a returning veteran, a former cartographer, Elijah Morgan, who is speaking at a local high school in Chicago about the importance of civilian life. The article mentions his severe leg injury and his long recovery. It's just a small piece buried deep in the column, but the convergence of details, Elijah Morgan, cartographer, leg injury, it confirms the identity, and it confirms the outcome. He is actively participating in the boring, beautiful life he missed. I look at the picture. The man is smiling, his dark hair is neat, and his eyes are clear and watchful, just as I remembered them in the low light of the tent. He is standing by a chalkboard, pointing to a map. I fold the newspaper carefully, tucking the small article into my uniform pocket. I will transcribe it into the journal later. I don't need to meet him. We had our conversation. We were necessary for each other in that small, perfect moment of shared fear. He is safe. He is fulfilling the promise of the ordinary. I feel a profound sense of calm settling over me. The circle is complete. I finish my coffee, noticing that the floor of the staff lounge, where a nurse had spilled some sugar earlier, feels distinctly sticky. I smile softly. The sticky floors are safe. I gather my notes and walk toward the ward, ready for my evening rounds. The long, reflective pause is over. I am home.